Perfect. There should go. And like I said, wanted to let everyone know we've got a discount code in case you are planning to go to the Pass Summit and haven't purchased your pass yet. The discount code will save you $150. It's VC15MBK7 asterisk. And the price on the screen you see is good until July 12th. All right, and without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jim. If you don't know, Jim is a PowerShell MVP, and if I recall correctly, he's been 5 years now, as long as I have been a SQL MVP. And he's been a go-to resource for me over the years when I had tough PowerShell or .NET questions and needed some help. And today's session, we will go ahead and post the recording of up on our YouTube channel once we get it converted. And if Jim remembers to hit start-transcript, we'll even put up the code that he used.
Thank you for reminding me to do that.
Yeah, and that's all I got. Jim, it's all you.
All right, I am taking control. All right. All right, there we go. So I always like to do a quick verification. Can you tell me what you guys see?
Stupid PowerShell tricks.
There you go. All right, so let's move on with that. So as Aaron mentioned, this is Stupid PowerShell Tricks, and I appreciate you guys giving me an hour of your time to let me show you some stupid stuff. So let's get on with the stupid things. My name's Jim Christopher, as Aaron mentioned. I'm a PowerShell MVP. I've been one for about 5 years. It's kind of weird. I'm a software developer, but I've got an MVP in the server space, so it's and you're going to see why. I think like a lot of the stuff that I do for PowerShell has to do with systems integration and automation and focused on software development. So that'll probably come through today. Up until last November, I was working for myself, running my own business around doing those kinds of things. And but then I took a job with Pluralsight, so I'm actually a curriculum director for enterprise content over at Pluralsight now. And I know this isn't on my bio for Pass. I haven't updated that thing in years, so I apologize. But seriously, this is what I'm doing right now. If you want to learn more about the Pluralsight offering, you can go to pluralsight.com. If you have any questions about PowerShell or anything I'm showing you here today, you can reach out to me on Twitter. I'm bfarino on Twitter. You can email me at the email address on the screen, or you can also find all the code behind everything that I'm showing you today on my GitHub account, which is github.com/bfarino. So let's talk about today's stupid theme, which generally when I do a stupid PowerShell trick session, I like to have them all sort of centered around a specific topic. And today's topic is the PowerShell gallery. If you're not familiar with the PowerShell gallery, you can go to this URL, open it right now, www.powershellgallery.com. And in fact, I have it open here now. So if you're a software developer and you're familiar with concepts like NuGet, which is a package manager for Visual Studio projects, or if you're familiar with Chocolatey, which is a sort of Windows level package manager for software, the PowerShell gallery is a very similar idea that is based around PowerShell modules and DSC resources. So in fact, it's built on the same technology as NuGet and Chocolatey, but it's integrated with PowerShell 5. Or with Windows Management Framework 5, excuse me. So when you go to the gallery, you'll notice there's a lot of warnings in here. There's a lot of, the word preview is used quite a bit, right? Because none of this stuff is fully baked. It's all in preview mode. So the gallery is preview, Windows Management Framework is preview, and that might scare you. But, if you look at this page, we've got 40,000 almost 40,000 downloads of almost 200 modules in there. This is something that people are already using every day. It's something that the MVPs have been asking for quite some time. So, but yeah, so the PowerShell gallery is this place where people can go, or well, they will be able to go and publish their own modules so that they can pull them down whenever they need them. And in particular, I'm going to talk about some of the ones that I've crammed in here. In fact, well, now I got to change my API key. There it is. So I'm going to go to my modules. There it is. So this is a list of all the modules I have published in here right now, and they're kind of all over the place. I've got providers around everything from like SQLite and transactional file system provider. I've got some modules we'll talk about today, integrating other languages with PowerShell like ScriptCS. A module we're going to talk about called Autovars that allows you to define calculated variables inside of your PowerShell session. And also there's a new module that's up there called Simplex, and I just did a talk around Simplex at the PowerShell Summit here in Charlotte just last month. So that's a very exciting project. I'm also going to talk about one that's not in here yet. And I'll get to that when I get to it. But for now, let's just move over to the PowerShell ISE. So I'm going to go ahead and do my start transcript. And hopefully this works. If it doesn't, I will change to the console. All right, there we go. So transcript is started. It'll be available with the video, with whatever the artifacts are for this course. So I'm not going to talk about actually pulling down these modules and installing them. There's enough instruction on the site to do that. I'm actually going to start walking through what these things do, right? So if I actually, let's look at Autovars first. If I go to the Autovars page on the gallery, it tells me everything I need to know. Once I have WMF5 installed, all I have to do is type install module, name Autovars, and it just works, right? It pulls it down and installs it, and it's available, right? So I don't have to worry about paths and permissions, and in theory, all that stuff is managed for me. So let's talk about Autovars, right? I'm going to import module Autovars, and now I'm going to show you what the commands are that are defined inside of that module. There's only one command, and it's called new auto variable. So if any of you have ever worked in a language like, let's say Visual Basic or VB Script, right? You had a variable called now, and that always translated to the current date and time, right? And in PowerShell, we can define a variable named now. I'll call it local now, right? And I can assign it a value of get date. Right. And so now I have a variable named local now, but its value doesn't change, right? It's always set to the same date and time. The idea behind Autovars is to let you create variables that you can reference that actually change their value depending on when you reference them, or there's some kind of calculated value. Inside of PowerShell, we call them tied variables, and they're definitely possible. In fact, there's lots of tied variables already defined inside of PowerShell. Like for example, $$ is one of the last commands. It's the last command that I ran, and so if I do it again, there's the last command. $? Represents the output or the success value for the last command, whether it succeeded or not. So there's all these tied variables that are already defined, and they're all calculated on the fly. So you can define your own inside of C# if you're writing your own PowerShell host or whatever, but no one wants to do that, right? So let's see how we can do it inside of PowerShell. Well, again, we just use the new Autovars command, or the new auto variable command that's inside the Autovars module. And we'll give our variable a name. I'm going to call it now. And I'm going to find a getter for it. And the getter is just a script block, right? So I'm going to use the command get date for the variable now. And I get no output. Generally speaking, I should return something, but I don't get an error, so I'm assuming everything worked. If I do $now, you can see that I now have the, I now have a variable that is changing its value every time I access it, and it's actually retrieving the current date time as I reference it. So again, this is something that's really easy to do in C# when you're hosting PowerShell or when you're extending PowerShell. It's not so easy to do on the shell, and that's why this module exists, is so that you can define these own variables and use them as you see fit. And it's really nice to actually have these things, so you can actually use interpolation. And so you can actually reference these things inside of strings, and PowerShell just sort of figures it out, it knows what to do. So again, just a little nicety to have laying around. And again, if you actually look at the gallery, it is one of my most downloaded modules that's in there next to SQLite. It's the most downloaded module, so people are getting a lot of use out of it. All right, so that's the simplest of the lot that I'm going to show you today. And the next one I'm going to move on to is actually ScriptCS. And this is another one of those integration projects that I was working on that ended up finding its way into the open source stuff that I've pushed out to the community. So if you're not familiar with ScriptCS, it's actually a scripted form of the C# language. It uses the Roslyn compiler. That's sort of part of the next generation of Visual Studio and the whole C# offering to do a lot of code analysis. But what it does is it allows you to compile C# on the fly. And I'm going to back up a little bit. We've had the ability to use C# and PowerShell, I think forever. I think since it was called Nomad, we had this add type command, right? And so if I look at the help for that, it says, oh, you can add a Microsoft.Network type or a class to a Windows PowerShell session. And there's lots of different forms for it, but the one that I'm going to show you right now is this add type, this first one, where you can use a type definition. And hopefully I'll get this right the first time. Let's see. So I'm going to do a type definition. I'll do a simple here string and say that let's do the public class my type, and we'll do a public static string my value, and make that a getter. And for that, let's return the string hello world. Right. And just for clarity, I'm going to count my braces. Those match, those match, those match. All right. Nope, didn't like it. No characters are allowed after the, let's try that. There we go. All right, so now I've defined a class in C#, and if I did everything correctly, I should be able to just reference that type, the type my type inside of my session, and I can actually reference the properties and whatnot that are defined in there as well. And this has all been very handy, right? It lets you sort of drop C# code and compile it on the fly and have it just sort of appear in your PowerShell session. And in fact, that's how Autovars works. The module that I just showed you is it uses add type to define a class that helps you create these automatic variables. That's all well and good. Like I said, we've had this the whole time. It's still kind of heavy. Like you saw, it took me a couple of tries to get it right. And again, if I'm just hacking on the shell, I want something that's a little bit easier. And that's where ScriptCS comes in. All right, so I'm going to import my ScriptCS module. And again, the first thing I always like to do when I'm showing these things off is to give you guys an idea of the types of commands that the module contains. So there's 4 commands. A lot of them have to do with what's called a ScriptCS session, which is sort of like, you can imagine that as like a whole space where all your variables and methods are defined, and it gives you a way to isolate those things from one another. But the command I'm going to focus on right now is invoke ScriptCS. And if you use PowerShell, you can probably guess what invoke ScriptCS does by its name. But let's look at the help so you can get a better idea for it. So in its basic form, it accepts script as a string, and it executes that code as dynamically compiled on the fly C#. And there's a little bit more that happens there, and we'll talk about in a second, but let me show you what that means. So if I do invoke ScriptCS, and I'll define a script that I want to execute, and what I'll do is I'll define, let's do access the system, date time, .utc now value. And that looks like a whole statement. I think that'll work. And if I hit enter, it takes a second to load up the ScriptCS runtime, and then it just spits out the date time, right? So again, on the surface, it's not that big of a deal, right? Because we already have the ability to compile and run C# code inside of our session. But the nice thing about this is that it's a lot closer to the wire. Like, so I can actually use this on a pipeline, right? So I can invoke ScriptCS and get the current date time, and well, what is that? Let's pipe that to get member and get that, get that data out. Oh, well, it's a system date time, right? Well, now that I know that, let's isolate the, let's expand the what is it? Well, I didn't even look at the proper names because I wasn't paying attention. So let me run get member again. Day of the week. So let's select and expand the day of the week. Oops. You have to spell it right. Right. Oh, it's Friday. That's good. Happy Friday, everybody. Yeah, but the point is that I can now execute very small units of C# code as part of a pipeline. And again, the idea, the idea why this is valuable may not seem apparent on the surface, but if you've done a lot of work, integrating C# and PowerShell and vice versa, you end up wanting to do things in one language or the other that are prohibitively difficult without a lot of work. So a good example, again, I can pull things out of ScriptCS like I did here. The other thing is that I can actually pipe data into ScriptCS and manipulate it there. So like, for example, if I use the range operator to take the numbers 0 through 9, like I've done here, and let's pipe that to ScriptCS. And in this case, I'm going to use it's a special variable that ScriptCS, the ScriptCS module lets you access while you're executing on a pipeline. And it's called PS commandlet. Oops. In fact, let's look at that. So if I just do invoke ScriptCS and I have it execute the value PS commandlet, it's going to return whatever value that is, and I can actually analyze that inside of PowerShell. So looking at that, it looks like I've got some stuff here. Let's actually do get member and see all the stuff that we can do with that. So it's using a current commandlet context as the type name, but if you'll notice, there's all sorts of things I can do here, like write warnings and errors, throw errors. One of the ones that I wanted to point out here is this input property. And that is actually the pipeline input that came in for the invoke ScriptCS command. So, back to the original example, if I do the range operator, I'll do, from the numbers 0 through 9, let's invoke ScriptCS. And the script I want to execute is to take the number 5 and add it to the value that I'm passed into the pipe. Right. So again, reading this pipeline as I would explaining it to you over lunch, let's say, take the numbers 0 through 9 and then pipe those to the invoke ScriptCS command, where I want you to execute this block of code that takes the integer 5 and adds it to the input that has been cast to an integer as well. Right. And if I do that, the output becomes, intuitively the number 5 plus whatever number's been passed in. Again, I'm not an idiot. I know it's a lot easier to do something like this, for the number 0 through 9, for each of those, just take the input and add 5. Right, so that's I know that that's possible. So why would you want to do something like this? Well, one of the things that we have access to in C# that we don't have access to in PowerShell is language integrated query, or LINQ. This is again something that the MVPs and the language nerds have been asking for, and we've just never gotten. So, but now I don't have to wait for PowerShell to implement it. I can just pull it in using ScriptCS. So again, this might take a couple of tries because my link's a little rusty, but let's see if I can do this. So, so I'll say from the value I in PS commandlet input. Let's make that an integer, and we'll make that an, let's try that. Input, select, let's try this, where I is less than 5, select I. Again, this might take a couple of tries. Nope, it worked. Haha, first try. Yeah, so now I can actually use this really sophisticated C# feature, language integrated query, directly from the shell. I don't have to, build it, open Visual Studio and build this huge DLL and then define a PowerShell interface to it so I can access one specific type of data. I can literally just sit here on the shell and pound it out and get it working, right? And again, that's the reason I use PowerShell. It's the reason I go to all this effort, is because that's where I like to spend my time. I like to be done. So. All right. Just checking time. Yeah, we're doing pretty good.
I wanted to interrupt you with a comment real quick. Eric said that was awesome.
Oh, okay, well, good. Yeah, I'm just like, I am monitoring the chat window for questions. I don't see any, but so I guess point of order, is that where, would the question show up inside of the chat window, Aaron, or is that something out of band?
Nope, they show up under the questions window.
Oh, the questions window. Look at that. Okay, well, good. So Eric, that's not a question, but I'll let it slide this time. All right. Yeah, so one other thing about ScriptCS, this is an experimental feature. It doesn't work very well. I don't know how far I'm going to take it. But one of the things, I've got a lot of projects out there, like there's one called StudioShell, where it's like a PowerShell integration inside of Visual Studio, lets you automate Visual Studio. It's really, really powerful, really fun. And when ScriptCS came out, everyone's like, make StudioShell work for ScriptCS. I'm like, well, okay, I don't know what that looks like, but sure. And I started looking at it, and again, I still can't figure out what that's supposed to look like. But one of the things people keep wanting to do is to just intermix the languages entirely. So they want to open a shell and be able to work in ScriptCS for a while and then work in PowerShell for a while. And so I just added this REPL flag for invoke ScriptCS. And again, experimental. I don't know how far I'm going to take it. It's a little bit buggy, but if you're not familiar, REPL stands for read, evaluate, print loop, and that is what a shell does, right? So when I type commands, I type a command in PowerShell, hit enter, it reads the command, evaluates it, prints the results, and then loops over that process. And invoke ScriptCS-REPL does the same thing, except it uses it does that for ScriptCS. So now the prompt changes to ScriptCS, and I can actually type in, C# related commands, and it just allows me to interact with ScriptCS in a REPL fashion. But the nice thing is it's still using the PowerShell level features for formatting and output. And again, that's a lot of that's where it gets kind of buggy, because that's sort of it's a very dark area of PowerShell. It's not very well documented, but there is some hope. Kirk Monroe just published and pushed some modules to open source. One is called, I think, Format X or X Format. I can't remember his nomenclature, but it completely reworks the formatting layer of PowerShell to make it very intuitive and sort of work the way you would expect it to. So that's sort of the next step with that, is to see if I can't fold Format X into this somehow to keep this working the way that you would expect it to. But again, you can do all sorts of crazy nutty things in here and have a ball with it. You can even define variables. Let's try variable A equals new. I don't know. Now I'm drawing a blank. New system.io.memory stream. Nope. See, now it kicked me out. There's a bug. As soon as you hit an error inside of ScriptCS, it just destroys the whole REPL, which it shouldn't do. So again, mileage may vary, but by all means, knock yourself out. All right. Yeah, Mike Robbins has posted a link to Kirk's code inside of the questions window. So if you have access to that, check it out. He's done a really good job. He sat down and showed it to me at the summit. It's really amazing stuff. Okay. All right. We're doing pretty good on time, and those two were relatively simple modules. The next one that I want to show you is Simplex, and this one's going to require a little bit of background. Those of you who've seen me talk before, or if you use Studio Shell or some of my other modules, you know that the PowerShell provider is like my favorite integration point for lots of different reasons, right? But let's talk about that. So if I actually look at this command, get PS provider inside of PowerShell, I get a list of these providers, and the job of these things is to provide the backend support for PowerShell drives. Right. And you're probably familiar with you have the file system drives. You might be familiar that you have other drives too. Like if you've ever done remoting, you've probably worked with the WSMan drive. If you've worked, if you've dug around in the internals, you know that there's a variable drive inside of PowerShell, and you can actually use commands like dir or get child item to actually, get a complete list of the variables that are defined inside of your PowerShell session. And so yeah, you'll actually notice it's completely integrated. Like there's the now variable that we defined with Autovars and its current value. Right, but these providers, I find them very intuitive, right? When I look at an API or I get a module and it's got 800 commands in it, and I don't remember what they are, and it takes me some time to figure it out. I like providers because there's only like 10 commands you can use, right? In fact, go back to my C drive. I'll do them. I'll do a get command, anything that's got the word item in it. This isn't all of them, so you can ignore that first batch. But if you look at these commandlets, clear item, copy item, get child item, get item, right? There's only 10 things that you can do with these providers, right? They have, they're just containers, and the containers can contain other containers, or they can contain items. And it's just a question of what are those things? What are those items? What are those containers? And what I found is that a lot of situations apply themselves very well. They fit very well into that containership model. Like the classic example would be, the database stuff. There's a SQLite module that lets you interact with databases like as if there were drives on or files on your system. It's the same set of commands. Right, so that's what a provider is that drive that backs that hierarchy. And I've gone to great lengths over the years to try to make that as easy as possible to create, right? So I've created enough of them. I know what the roadblocks are, and so again, if you look at on NuGet, it's not available in the gallery, but on NuGet there's a project called P2F that is meant for C# developers who are implementing their own providers. And again, it makes the process of doing that relatively simple. But the one thing I noticed is that even when people tried to use P2F, there's too many features available, and they really wanted something that was just dirt simple, and that's where Simplex came from. It's actually, I use P2F to create a very rich PowerShell integration that is, I wanted to make it as stupid simple as I possibly could to define a PowerShell provider, and I'm pretty sure I did that. And the way it works is it uses this little DSL that's actually a PowerShell script to define a provider, right? And so this is an example of the domain language. DSL means domain-specific language, and so if you've used modules like Saki or Pester, they've kind of got the same idea. They use custom keywords and things like that to define their own kind of scripting interface, and that's what Simplex does. So it uses this language, starts with root, and root can contain folders. Folders can contain scripts and other folders. and scripts can actually now contain other scripts. So you got this really simple environment to define containment. And like you can kind of just figure out what this provider is going to look like, right? The root is the root of the drive, and then there's going to be a folder named events, and inside of that events folder, there's going to be three things. One's named errors, one's named warnings, and one's named infos. And if you look at the contents inside of those, like if I look at what happens if I go into errors, you just look at the code and you say, oh, okay, well, it's going to get the last 20 error messages out of the application event log. And warnings is going to do the same thing for warnings, and infos is going to do the same thing for the information level events. So this is the script. This is what it looks like, and let's take a look at how you use it. And again, it's a module, right? You can install it from the gallery. So we always have to start with import module Simplex. And again,
Jim, can I?
Yeah.
Can you just bump the font size up a notch?
I can. How's that? Tell you what, how's that? All right, I'm going to move forward. Correct me if it, or ask me to bump it up some more if I need to. All right, so we import the Simplex module, and if you look at the commands, oops, Aaron messed me up. There's only 3 commands, and it's those 3 keywords that we saw in the DSL. So root, folder, and script. That's it. That's all you can do. So how do you actually load that module, or how do you actually mount that script as a provider, as a drive? Well, you just use the standard command new PS drive, and you have to give the drive a name, and we'll call this DSL, and you have to tell it which provider we're using, and we're using Simplex. And then the last parameter is this root, and this is where we tell it the path to that script, right? And again, I'm not really sure. Let me double check where that lives. Okay, yeah, so I just have to, this path that's in the tooltip, I have to provide that path in the root here. So there we go. All right. Woo. All right. So again, standard PowerShell command, new PS drive. I give the drive a name, DSL. I tell it what provider I'm going to use. I'm going to use the Simplex provider. And then for the root parameter, I'm just giving it a complete path to that DSL script that we looked at inside of the script pane. So I run that, it returns an object that represents the drive that was just mounted. And if I do get PS drive and look at it, you can see it there. There it's now listed. There's the DSL drive. It's backed by the Simplex provider, and its root is there. So, the amazing thing is that's a fully fledged provider. It can do all the things a provider can do, really. So I can actually CD over to the DSL drive, and I can do a DIR. And well, there's my events folder. Let me pull up the actual DSL script and show you. Right. So remember we had the root of the drive, and then there's an events folder listed there. And if I actually do a DIR on the events folder, it shouldn't, there's no prizes for guessing what's going to be in there. We should see 3 folders, errors, warnings, and infos. Again, if I expand it further and look at let's do infos. I don't want to show you the errors that I've been executing on my machine, but if I do a DIR for events/infos, it's actually going to run that get event log command and return me the last 20 informational logs from the application event log. So again, you could just, I kind of hear what people are thinking. It's like, well, why can't I just run get event log and, just get those things myself? And it's like, well, one of the things I use this for example, is when I want to sort of collate different sources of information. Like I've got event logs, but I also have application level logs and IIS logs, and they all live in different places. It's nice to sort of cram them all into one drive, and then to be able to do things like this. Where I can just go to the root of that drive and do, search for everything under here, where a parameter like message matches J. I don't know, just making something up. Oops. Right, and then now it's searching the event log, it's searching the logs on my file system, whatever I've defined inside of this provider, it's scouring all of those things for me. Again, the Simplex providers are very simple to make. The level to entry here is extremely low, and that's by design. But there's also some limits to what you can do with them. Most of the time, a provider is sort of a rewrite experience. Like you can create a new file with a file system provider. Right now, you can't really do that with Simplex providers. You can just read. It does offer some ability to create things, but what it ends up doing is actually creating new folder and script nodes, and that's going to change moving forward. A friend of mine, Oshin Grihan, has implemented something called Script Provider, and he wanted to create something like this, and he and I have been talking about it, and what we're considering doing is actually adding some parameters to like the script node, basically just an add script and a remove script block that would allow you to define what happens when you try to add or remove an object from that location inside of the provider. It's not implemented yet. We're still talking about what that would end up looking like. But just to give you an idea, that's sort of the plan for it moving forward. Right. So, but there's lots of stuff you can do with it. Like this is the sort of the bare bones simple example. If we look at another example here, you can actually, it's just a script, right? This is, the DSL is just a PowerShell script, so we can actually use functions and variables inside of that script like we normally would. This is the same kind of situation, same layout, events, errors, warnings, and infos, but I'm using a function here so that I don't have to repeat the command. So that way, if I want to change the number of entries that are returned, I only have to do it in one place. So we want to make sure we still use good coding practices inside of this DSL. Other things you can do. You can create dynamic providers. This actually gets kind of fun. There's some really silly things that you can do. Let me go back over to the C drive. So like in this case, it's defining the same provider. It's just doing it dynamically off of a list. So I have errors, warnings, and informations, and for each of those types defined, it's actually defining a script node on the fly. So doing that dynamically. So if I wanted to add, a success audit, I could just pop that in the list and reload the provider, and it would just work, right? So I was actually demoing this stuff at the PowerShell Summit, like I said, and Jeff Snover was there. It was awesome, and he actually asked a really good question. He's like, if I look at this, he said, folders can contain folders and scripts. He said, can you nest scripts inside of other script folders? And at first I was like, I don't know. It turns out you couldn't at the time, but it was such a neat idea that I decided to make it work. And so what you have now is the ability to, you can define dynamic script content like this. We have a script folder named outer that contains other things like other script nodes like this one, which would end up with the name inner. Again, very, very dynamic, very flexible, and like I said, you can get just really silly with it. In this case, I can do something just remarkable, or not remarkable, but just really, really silly, like do something like get date, and I want to do the, let's do the second, right? And that's going to end up being the name of the folder that contains a list of processes. And I wouldn't normally do this, right? But just for the sake of having a little fun, let's mount that and see what happens. Nested script. So we got to change this to DSL1. Oop. All right, so I just mounted that drive, and if I CD over that drive and do a dir, we have an outer folder, and if I go in there and do a dir, the name of that folder is actually going to change once a second, which is really annoying if you want to access the stuff in there. But the whole point is to just show you that it's completely dynamic at this point. The link between the hierarchy and the script that backs it is completely flexible at this point, which makes this just a really powerful platform for creating these types of hierarchies. Again, I use this a lot to collate information. If I just want to collate logs and access them from one point, this is a really good way to do it. The other interesting aspect of this is that it lets you sort of combine providers. So, like here's an example where I've got a DSL that defines a script folder named docs, and it literally just references my home documents folder. So if I do that, let me go back to the C drive, just to be safe. I'm going to go ahead and mount that. Providers plural, and I'm going to go ahead and call this PROV. If I go to the PROV drive and do a dir, I get the docs folder like it says inside of the DSL script. And if I go into docs and I do a dir, what happens next is kind of interesting, right? So inside of docs, you'd expect to see a list of what's in my home documents folder, right? And that's what happens. Here's a list of all the stuff that's in there. In fact, there's our transcript right there. But one of the things that happens is Simplex looks at that stuff that's coming through the pipe and says, oh, that stuff's from a provider too. I know exactly what to do with those things. So if I wanted to interact with these things as well, let's say I wanted to go into my my Hackday folder from here, I could just cd into Hackday, right? And if I can dir in there, well, now I'm interacting with another provider through Simplex. I'm actually interacting with the file system provider from inside of Simplex. So it becomes this way of sort of transversing between different providers on your system. So you can work with the registry and search the registry the same way at the same time that you're working with the file system and searching the file system, just by linking them up underneath the same Simplex provider. And one more sidebar about this. The Simplex, actually, I tore it out of a larger project that was called Polaris, which was actually an integration of PowerShell and Windows Explorer. This thing right here, right? And I don't have it installed on here. It never really went anywhere. It required some really expensive components to make it work. And if I ever find an open source equivalent, I'll revisit the project. But like you have control panel here. Well, it would actually create a node like control panel or a drive or your libraries node over here in the tree that was backed by PowerShell. And the way that you define what appeared in that node was using this little DSL script here, right? So that's where it came from. But one of the interesting notions about the Explorer integration is this idea that everything's a file, and there's actually a way to do that. Like if you mount the registry in here, you can actually sort of grab that registry node and copy it to the C drive, and it would figure out how to do that, right? It would let you write code to implement that. That's not something that exists inside of PowerShell at this point in time. Like if I'm sitting here on the C drive and I want to copy something like so I'll copy vpass.txt to the registry, right? The destination, it will be hkey current user / software, right? That doesn't mean anything to PowerShell. And if I try to do that, it's going to come back and bark at me and say like, oh, well, the source and destination path, they're not on the same provider. One's in the registry, one's in the file system. I have no idea how to process that. But one of the ideas that we're kicking around with Simplex is actually providing a way to do that, right? So it doesn't make sense to copy. It kind of does make sense. Like if you have a reg file and you want to copy it to the registry, that's kind of that operation makes sense. There should be a way for you to do that. Same token, if you want to grab a registry key and copy it to a file location, again, that should create a reg file on that location. And it's just a question of how to define that functionality inside of this DSL and still keep it simple, right? So at this point, I am looking for questions. I don't see any. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the last one. this is the last stupid trick I wanted to show you, and it's actually not available in the gallery yet, but it will be probably in the next month or so. This is something that I was trying to sell at one point. It's something called Seashell, and in a nutshell, all it does is provide data visualization on the shell. And you're probably asking, what does that mean? Let me show you. So first thing I'm going to do is import module Seashell. I'm not going to show you the commands. I'm just going to go ahead and run something. Let's do this. I will do lsv star. Let's do vpass star. All right, so I'm isolating that vpass file, and what I'm going to do is pipe it to this command out chart, and I'm going to name that chart the v file, and the type of plot that I want to plot is a column, and I want to plot the length of the file by its name. Right. And in response, Seashell opens up this really nice bar graph, right? And it's not very interesting. There's only one thing in there, but what do you do? So let's take a look and let's see if we can do something a little bit more interesting. But that's the idea, right? Is to be able to take objects from the shell, no matter what they are, and just say, hey, plot these things, plot this value by that value, and show me what's happening. Again, I'm a very visual person. That's kind of where this came from, was really just wanting to be able to see things every once in a while. It's not sophisticated. It's not Tableau or anything like that. It's not like, any kind of, scientific data visualization solution. It's literally just, really close to the wire graphing for PowerShell objects as they come through the pipeline. But it's also very handy. Let's see, if I go into my documents folder, I bet I got some cool stuff in there. Or maybe I don't. Let's go into my projects folder and let's find something to look at. Let's look at TXF. There's always good stuff in there. Go into the source. All right, here we got a couple of files, right? Down here at the bottom, they all have different lengths, but they all start with C. So I'm going to go ahead and do an ls. Give me all the files, and then, grab those files and pipe those to a chart. Name C#, and again, let's plot columns, and I want to plot the length by the name. And it just figures it out. It's like, oh, okay, here we go. Well, there's the length in bytes, and there's the name of the file. So again, it's just a really quick and dirty way of me just grabbing a bunch of stuff off of the pipeline and visualizing it. So again, on the surface, okay, that's kind of nice. It actually has some really advanced capabilities. So one of the things let's take a look at this. So I'll run git counter, right? Let's find a performance counter to work with. Okay, there's one. Let's use this one. We'll do percent total processor time, and let's explore that a little bit. So I'll do let's do a git counter, and I just want the value for that one performance counter. I want the value for percent processor time, right? And it spits it out and says, there you go. And it's like, okay, well, what's that counter sample? Let's look at that. All right, so if I do that and I look at the counter samples, excuse me, it breaks it down. It looks like we have a cooked value. So let's expand that a little bit. What do we have to work with inside of that? Let's just do format list star. All right, so every time I pull a counter sample out of this performance counter, I get all these values. I have this, looks like the cooked value is the actual value, the percentage of the counter, and then I have a timestamp here that tells me when that sample was taken. So it's all very handy. One of the nice things that I can do here with the get counter command is I can add the recurse parameter, or continuous, excuse me. So get counter, that counter name dash continuous, and then I want to just expand those counter samples. And what happens is that PowerShell just starts querying that performance counter once a second, right? It's telling me how much CPU time I'm using. It looks like our recording is using about maybe about 10% of the around 10% of the CPU. But this goes on forever, right? This never comes back, and now I can't do anything inside of this shell. until I actually break the command. So it's useful, but it eats up all of your session, right? So one of the things that Seashell lets you do, and again, this is one of the more powerful features, is it lets you sort of capture that notion that we're doing here. So I'm gonna wrap that command, get counter name continuous, select expand, the counter samples. I'm going to wrap those in squiggly brackets and make it what we call a script block. Right. So now it's a block of code that PowerShell can either execute, or not, depending on how we treat it. I'm going to pipe that to outchart. Right. And I'm going to name this. We'll call this CPU. The type this time I'm going to use a line plot. And again, I want to plot the cooked value from the timestamp or from the sample by the timestamp. All right. So let's kick that off. And you can see it's actually updating as the data is updating, but the big difference is that I can still use my shell, right? So the shell is still executing all of that code in the background. It's updating this plot for me, but I can still interact with the shell and I can still do things. So okay, we have very simple, low level entry to visualization. They're not very sophisticated, but at the same time, they work really well with the shell and they really let you get things done. And in fact, and they're actually pretty flexible. Like I can actually come back to the shell and just add stuff to that chart. So let's say instead of total processor time, I want total percent user time for all my processors, but I want to put it on the same plot. I still want to put it on the CPU plot. So I can go ahead and run that. And if I go back to the plot, you can see a second line shows up. Again, there's still some things that need to get worked out. You'll notice that the legend isn't accurate. It's plotting cook value, but you don't know which is which, so you kind of have to pay attention to those things. But trying to figure out a simple way to get all that stuff working, and then this will show up in the gallery as well. And again, like I was saying, this was a paid product at one point. The amount of interest in it was pretty low, so I just tore out all of the commercial components and replaced them with open source equivalents. And I'm going to put it on the gallery and release it to GitHub as soon as the code's cleaned up a little bit and all these little bits are working. So, those are all of my stupid tricks for the day.
Hey, Jim.
Yeah.
Do you want to include maybe one for clipboard?
Oh yeah, you want to? Yeah, so that's a good one. There's one that's this one's always fun. So let me find something here. Let's say I want to get the content for that file, right? And it spits it to the shell, and that's great. But I can actually just pipe it to the clip command, which will put it on the clipboard, and then I can open up Notepad or email, whatever, and just paste it in there, right? So again, clip command is another really stupid PowerShell trick that you can use every day to just sort of shave a few minutes off here and there. So.
And didn't you teach me something about pipe it to CSV first to be able to turn it into a table or something?
I'm sorry, Aaron, you're breaking up. You sound like you're talking through Tim Saran wrap, so I can't understand what you're saying.
Wasn't there one about sending it to CSV first or something to get it to export like a table instead of just a string? Maybe it was HTML, something.
I don't remember. Probably. Don't remember. But yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of commands that are, that center around working with CSV files. Here we have import and export CSV, so you can actually take CSV files either in or out of PowerShell, and they become objects with fields and just very handy, very easy way to work with that data.
Awesome. All right, cool. Well, if anyone has questions, now's the time. All right. And no questions so far. Did you see that one about the module support for Nano?
No, I'm having a hard time actually seeing the questions.
It just said, would the scripts module support Nano? That came right after the, I think one of the first things you were showing off.
The script module support Nano. As far as I know, yeah, it's it depends on how stripped down the .NET framework is that they're building Nano on. I don't have any experience with it, and I don't know. So.
All right, cool. Well, Jim, thanks so much for doing this for us. Really
My pleasure.
appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And I'll get the video posted up to the YouTube channel as soon as I can.
That sounds awesome. I'm stopping the transcript now, and I will include that in the recording.
Perfect. If you want to go ahead and stop.